We've had some great classes. We've had some great discussions, some really good, kind of unique topics, especially, I know, just putting them together and then even just delivering them here. They've been some kind of unique topics, but we've had some really good discussion, hopefully had some really good thoughts come out of it. I know I've certainly learned a lot from everyone here in this class. The theme tonight, though, is the idea of the star counter. All week we've been talking about different lessons from space. So we thought about in the beginning when God said, let there be light. He created the sun and the moon. We talked about all of those different things. And then on Monday night, we got to, I'm not going to be able to remember, the winds of Saturn, no standing on Saturn. The idea of life pushing us around as Christians, how life can oftentimes push us around in a variety of different directions, but how we can stand in Christ. And then even last night, we thought about the power of prayer, the sound of silence in space. You can't hear in space, but no matter where we go, no matter where we may be, God can always hear us. And tonight, we're going to kind of take a step back and look at the power and the majesty of God as we think about the star counter. Kind of the introduction to this lesson thinks about the idea of the billions and billions of stars in the galaxy. God knows each and every one of them. I read an interesting statistic as I was thinking about this. I forgot to write it down in this particular version of my lesson notes, but it said it would take one person, over 10,000 years to count the stars in the sky. 10,000 years, and yet God knows each and every one of those stars. But you think about all the way back from the earliest days, people would use stars as a guide. The North Star, the star that never moves, you can always kind of rely on that to give you a general sense of direction, which way you need to be going, and things of that nature. But the idea that the kids are going to be talking about tonight and the teens are going to be talking about tonight is the Star of Bethlehem. Thinking about a good idea of using the stars as direction. Turn over, if you would, to Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse number 1. Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse number 1. And again, kind of as we've said all week, this isn't just, I don't want this to just be a lecture-based class where you have to sit here and just listen to me for a little while. Let's, if we can, have some discussion as well. Share your thoughts. Share any questions that you may have. We've got some questions here as well that we'll kind of get into as we go. But please feel free, if you've got any comments or anything, to go ahead and make those as we go through the lesson here tonight. But Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse number 1. Says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men came from the east, came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came over and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. When they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. The Star of Bethlehem, undoubtedly one of the most prominent examples in the Bible as we think of ideas like stars. Many times people will build like nativity scenes around Christmas time to depict this. And of course we know that's something that's not based on Scripture, that it was on December 25th or Christmas time or those themes. But we do know that there was that star that shone over Bethlehem that gave these wise men a sense of direction. And that's kind of the theme that we're going to be thinking about tonight as well, a sense of direction. In our lives, we're not going to get anywhere without some kind of sense of direction, of some sense of where it is we want to go with an end goal in mind. If you aim at nothing, you're always going to hit it. It's kind of the general idea. But if we have a target, if we have a goal, if we have something we want to achieve, and we're willing to put our minds to it, than we can. These wise men, they were just in the field at the time. They didn't know what was happening, but they saw this star and realized the significance of this star, and they decided to follow it. Have you ever stopped for just a little while to stargaze? To just take some time, and especially on a clear night, it's an incredible experience just to step back and look at the beauty of God's creation. I know it's been a little while now. Not too long after I got to Freed, I got together with some friends. There were 5 of us. We all decided to go out to Chickasaw. It's a state park about 10 minutes from campus. Went out late one night and down kind of a service road to get out to this just really wide clearing. The 5 of us were out there. We just parked the car and we got out and we just looked at the stars for a while. It was a beautiful, clear night. We were kind of up on a hill, so we were above a lot of the trees. I just looked at God's creation. And it just kind of takes your breath away when you stop and think about it. To see that God created all of that, and more importantly, that God knows all of that. God knows exactly where each of these stars are, and He has them all positioned in such a way that we can see all of them. Isn't that something to think about? Taking the opportunity to look at God's creation, though, the more you do it, the more you stop and realize, how can people say that there isn't a God? You're going to go outside, you're going to look at the night sky, and you're going to tell me that just happened to appear there. You're going to go outside right now and look out just at the hill, look at Ben Lomond Mountain right there, and tell me that just, bam, it appeared. No. With beauty like that, there has to be someone who created it. The stars, they're beautiful to look at. Even back in ancient times, we think about the ideas of navigation. People would navigate once you lost sight of land. Back in the days, say of even Christopher Columbus, once you lost sight of land, what are you going to do? You had to navigate yourself by the stars. And that's exactly what they did. They used that. They used those stars for a sense of direction, and they got to where they were going. How did those stars get there, though? Let's look at a couple different passages in the Old Testament first to really kind of think about how they got there. Psalm 147, verse 4 is the first one to look at. Psalm 147, verse 4. Psalm 147, we'll even begin in verse 1, just so we can really kind of get the feel of this psalm. The 147th Psalm, beginning in the first verse. It says, "Praise the Lord, for it is good to sing praises to our God, for it is pleasant and praise is beautiful. The Lord builds up Jerusalem. He gathers together the outcasts of Israel. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He counts the number of the stars. He calls them all by name." Now, I took 2 semesters of an astronomy course at Austin P. I needed some kind of science credit to get me through. I wasn't one of the college students that took biology or chemistry or anything like that. I really kind of undercut that and took an astronomy class because it was the only thing that was offered online at the time. So I did get kind of a general idea of it. Granted, it's been several years. I don't remember a whole lot of it now. But the idea is the names of some of these stars. It's incredibly complicated to think about all of those different things, the designations that scientists have for those, but God knows each and every one of those stars by name. Now, I find it hard to keep track of just a few things at once going on in life, and yet God can keep track of all of that. How amazing is that? Another example, though, Isaiah chapter 40, verse number 26. Isaiah chapter 40, verse number 26. God counts the stars and calls them by name. Isaiah 40, verse 26. It says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these things, who brings out their host by number. He calls them all by name, by the greatness of His might and the strength of His power. Not one is missing." God put all of those there for a very specific reason. When you stop and think about it again, the design of this creation begs for a creator. Now, where were we in the middle of all this? Where was mankind in the middle of all this? You know, Job was asked a similar question in Job chapters 38 through 40, a really good study. If you ever get the opportunity to go through the book of Job, I know it's kind of hard to follow, especially in the middle when his friends are rebuking him and things like that. But some of the conclusions that we can draw from Job are absolutely phenomenal. Turn over, if you would, to Job chapter 38. Job chapter 38. It's kind of fun to bounce around and look at a variety of different scriptures here. Job chapter 38. Job has basically given up. He's questioning if God truly is all-powerful. Based on everything that has happened to Job, he says, how could you let this happen? So Job chapter 38, beginning in verse number 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Where was I when that happened? Where were you when that happened? We were but a thought in the mind of God. We were thousands of years later down the road. God created all of those things. God has the power to do just that. But back to that idea of a sense of direction. God has given us a sense of direction in this life as well. We can use that stars. We look up to the stars because they're light. There's something to look at. We have a light to look up to as well. We talked about it earlier in the week. I think it was Sunday night, that idea of letting our light so shine before men that they may see our good works. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. But think about the great light, Jesus Christ. John chapter 1, verses 1 through 9 refers to Jesus as that light that was coming into the world. Something for us to look at. Something for us to aim towards. Something to give us a sense of direction. One good passage that really encompasses this idea of that sense of direction is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse number 24. 1 Corinthians 9, beginning in verse number 24. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse number 24. We all have a sense of direction. We all want to get somewhere in life. I'm in a lot of business classes and things like that right now. The idea is you need to set goals for your business. If you want your business to get bigger, if you want your business to get more profitable, you need to set goals and do something about those goals. The same applies for us as Christians. If I want to deepen my faith, if I want to study more, if I want to find myself praying more, I need to set goals and then do something about those goals. I have a sense of direction. What am I going to do about it? Notice what Paul says here. 1 Corinthians 9, beginning in verse 24. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate or is self-controlled in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Now let's put this into real terms for a minute. The Olympics are going on right now. I haven't been able to keep up with a whole lot of it, but it sounds like they've had a lot of good events. It's the Olympics. Everyone competes at the very top levels. They're doing their very best to win the gold. That's exactly what we're doing. No matter what the event is in the Olympics, there's always an end goal in mind, right? The 100-meter dash, the finish line is at 100 meters. The 400-meter hurdles, the finish line is at 400 meters. They have a goal in mind, but they still have to do something to get there. That's exactly what Paul is telling us. You know, in a worldly race, you know, out of those 8 people that are running at a time, only one of them is going to win it. As Christians, that's not the case for us, but we have to run like we're going to be the only ones to win it. I have to put in the time, I have to put in the dedication, I have to put in the training, I have to put in the hours to prepare to run my race and continue to run my race each and every day. That's that sense of direction that I have to have. Everyone who competes for the prize is temperate. They do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. We have a goal far greater than a gold medal in the Olympics. I did read an interesting article about that, though, that all the medals that were made in Tokyo this year were actually made from repurposed, recycled cell phones and electronic devices. All the components that go into all of the Olympic medals were made from recycled materials. And you know what's eventually going to happen to those medals? They're going to break down. They're going to decay. They're going to fall apart. But do you know what happens to the crown of life? Never fades away. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. I have fought the good fight. I have run the race. I have finished my course. Henceforth there is a crown of righteousness laid up for me, and not just for me, but to anyone and everyone who's willing to put in the time, who's willing to run their race, who has a sense of direction in their lives. So as we think about the stars, we use them for that sense of navigation, that sense of direction, but it also takes something from us. I can sit there and see exactly where the stars are and see exactly where I need to go, but then it's up to me to actually go there. Then it's up to me to do something about it. But I think one more beautiful point about the idea of the stars, not only do they give us a sense of direction, they give us a sense of God's care. One more verse that we'll spend probably just about the rest of our time in. Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse number 25. Matthew 6, beginning in verse number 25. So we think about the idea of the beauty of this world that God has created. There's a lot to be seen. There's a lot that I want to see one day. There's so much more that I'm never going to be able to see. But notice what Jesus himself says in Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 25. Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of much more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? So why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Think about these two examples that Jesus himself has given to us. Think about the birds of the air. Now, the birds are pretty. There's a lot of different birds you can watch. That was something that Grandmommy liked to do. She'd sit out on her back porch and watch the birds come through. Birds, there are a lot of pretty birds in the world. And you think about even the lilies. Think about the flowers. We had a flower farm a few years back. I absolutely loved growing flowers and seeing all the different varieties. They were beautiful, but they didn't do anything. They were pretty. We cut them. We brought them in. And they eventually died. But God took the time to put that much beauty into one place. Will he not more so take care of you? Think about the stars, much the same way. They're beautiful, but they're just there. But yet, God put them there. If God is going to take the time to do that for something that we're never going to reach, for something that we only get to see at night, is he not so much more going to take care of me? The stars aren't going to go anywhere. They aren't going to do anything. Ultimately, the stars are going to fade away as well. But God has given us a chance at eternal life. Doesn't that show you how much more God cares for us? All the way back to Abraham, we're told that Abraham's descendants would outnumber the stars of the sky. Look at the beauty of the earth that God has created, and then look at his most beautiful creation of all. That's mankind. That's you, and that's me. What are some other, though, just kind of along that general thought process, as we think about the beauty of God's earth, what are some things perhaps that you've seen that really kind of put that into perspective for you? Yes, sir.
I've been in northern Wisconsin, and like at night, seeing what we call the northern lights, that beautiful green, kind of glow, and just dancing and moving. And to me, that's real awe-inspiring. see something and that's not like ordinary or all the time, but something unusual like that.
Right.
Even more kind of inspires awe. And I also want to say, talk about Job 38, when God was asking Job all these questions about creating the heavens and the earth and the boundaries and the line of the earth, but yet these questions we still really can't answer today.
Right.
They're so smart, but these questions he asked Job, we still can't answer today. Or just those relationships, like you have a circle, there's a circumference, and from the middle to the outer edge is what they call pi. There's that exact relationship between like a round thing.
Right.
And just, all these things that we really still can't even explain today.
And yeah, both of those really do kind of attest to that power of God. Man, I would love to see the Northern Lights though at some point. That's one of those things that are on my bucket list. But just to think about the world that God has created. What else? Something else that you've seen, perhaps a little bit unique, that really illustrates that for you.
The birth of a child. Things together.
Sure, I was a little bit young the last time my two sisters were born. All I remember is that Lily Ann came way early, and then I don't even remember what Georgia did. But I'm sure I'm going to have to take your word for that one right now, but I'm sure that just that happening really shows you that God is in control of all of that. But God took the time to design each and every one of us. He looked down on the world and said, the world needs one of you. There's nobody else just like you. There may be a lot of people that are similar. There may be a lot that have the same physical characteristics, that have the same personality, a similar sense of humor and things like that. But there is no one on this earth just like you. God made you individual. God made you unique, just as the stars are. No two of them are exactly the same. Now, I'm sure you sit down here, you go outside here in a little bit when it gets dark, they're all going to look pretty similar, but no two of them are exactly the same. God took the time and the attention to detail to differentiate each and every one of those. And God took the time and the detail to differentiate each and every one of us as well. So those two ideas, kind of that idea of having a direction based on the stars, and also taking comfort in the fact that the God who created the stars took the time to create me. Both of those are kind of comforting, but kind of back to that general idea of direction. As we think about that goal in mind, what's some things that you use perhaps as motivation? We know life gets tough sometimes. What motivates you to keep fighting? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? What gets you up out of bed and says, I'm going to do this again today? Maybe we should have just stayed in bed.
Just the desire to live, please God.
And that's a good one. That's ultimately what it comes back down to. I want to see another day on earth. I want to perhaps see something that I haven't seen before. I want to be able to enjoy God's creation even more. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily every day is going to be filled with all sorts of fun, beautiful things. I know earlier this week I got to witness firsthand a water leak that I caused. That wasn't exactly beautiful, but hey, it was another day on God's green earth. And sometimes that's all it takes. It's just the idea that God put me here for a reason. God made me unique. God made all the stars unique. God made me just as unique as they are. What a privilege that is. But having direction, having something to base our lives off of. We'll get to that just a little bit more in the invitation. But we all have to have something to base our lives off of, to direct ourselves towards. Yes, sir?
I think sometimes, like, others can inspire us to, like, with life. Like, we may think about our parents or grandparents and the hardships and the struggles they had. Going through it sometimes can kind of help motivate, you think, especially grandparents that didn't have the modern conveniences we have.
Right. Very true. Yeah, a good example of that. Thomas is getting ready to start classes at Tennessee Tech here in about a week and a half. And so out at Centertown, where I've been preaching all summer, John Sane is out there. I've gotten to know him really pretty well. He graduated Tennessee Tech in 1971, and he had what they refer to as a slide rule. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's kind of what I figured. There's those that know who it is and those who don't. I had no idea what it was until John said, this is what I use. This is one of the things that got me through school in the late 60s and early 70s. He brought it and gave it to Thomas. Now, Thomas is the one that runs all the computers and stuff here and all of that, and enjoys computers and things like that. Thomas had no idea how to use a slide rule. I still have no idea how to use a slide rule. But the fact of the matter remains that that took design. That's complicated. That's hard to figure out. And that's just a small little thing about this long, about this tall, and you can slide it out just a little bit more. Something that small was so complicated. Look at the world around you. Tell me that wasn't infinitely more complicated, and tell me that didn't have a creator as well. I think that's a good example of that. Yeah, our grandparents did survive. I got to be careful because my grandmother's sitting right here, so I can't say too much about that. And both of my parents are too, but they made it, and here we are now. I guarantee back when Bill first started preaching, he wasn't able to stand up here and use his iPad for notes. Many of the other preachers I've got at home in kind of my library, I've got a whole bunch of sermon notes. A whole lot of those sermon notes came off of actual typewriters. Not everybody has the modern conveniences that we do, but as those things slowly evolve and develop and mankind becomes more and more creative with the things that they create, things become more complicated. But we know all of those things were created. We know somebody created the iPad. We know somebody created the camera that we're recording this on tonight. We know somebody created all of these things. And we can undoubtedly know that somebody created the earth that we're standing on and that we're inhabiting. We've got a sense of direction. Again, we'll get to that in just a minute, but we can take comfort in the fact, if nothing else, kind of as we close, we can take comfort in the fact that God created each and every one of us. Sometimes it may feel like we're just kind of blending into the crowd. We don't really stand out. We don't really matter. We're not really that important. We're really not that significant. And though we may think that, God never thinks that. God made us just as unique as the stars. How can we say anything to the contrary? A verse that we've kind of kept referring back to throughout the week, Romans chapter 8, verse 31, if God is for us, who can be against us? God was willing to do whatever it took to get me to heaven. God was willing to sacrifice His own Son to get me to heaven. If that doesn't give me motivation to get out of bed in the morning, I don't know what can. And it may be difficult sometimes. I'm not saying that it's not. But with that direction in mind, of the idea that God sent His Son to die for me, I want to live with Him for all eternity. If that's not our direction, then what is? Are there any other kind of closing thoughts or comments? I know this was a little bit, there were really, as I was trying to narrow down this lesson, I really couldn't narrow it down between those kind of two themes because they both are so important, I felt like. So I know it was a little bit more scattered tonight, but I appreciate that. Are there any other thoughts, comments that we want to mention before we wrap up here tonight?
I think it's something, all this created was for us. God created everything for us as well. And then He knew a mankind going to reject Him, and yet, Christ came.
And He did it all anyways. Very nice.
Another parallel, I've got a General Motors car, and I've got OnStar services that guidance and help, like you say, we're talking about God guiding us and
Right.
stuff.
Very true.
So mankind still, even not in a spiritual sense, refers to guidance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. All right, well, thank you very much for your time and attention this evening.